Hey HGTV, I'm Daniel Mathis. Welcome to my home in Oklahoma City. Come on in. So when you first come into my house, you definitely get a taste of what's to come right away. There's a lot of color and a lot of texture. Really the jumping off point for my foyer was the wallpaper. It caught my attention because it has an orange in it that is kind of my signature color, and I also really loved the graphic nature of the G's that are repeated. And I thought there was something fun about including sort of a higher end wallpaper with most of my thrifted finds. I kind of always say my entryway is a little bit Gucci and a little bit garage sale. So I think it's a fun nod to what's to come in the rest of the house, which is also a mixture of a lot of new and a lot of old. My home is really a reflection of my personality. It's kind of a laboratory for my dabbling in maximalism and really just playing with my collections. You know, I'm a lawyer by day, and so I have a very analytical job that doesn't always give you the opportunity to be creative, and so my creativity that I'm expressing is through my design at my house and through my collections. I have been a lifelong collector. It was something that I felt inclined to do at a very early age. So collections are incorporated all throughout my house. And then I have an interest in maximal design where I'm not afraid of color, I'm not afraid to mix patterns, I'm not afraid to mix styles, and so all of that is really exhibited throughout my house. So one of the first rooms you come to in my house off the foyer is a smaller room that I call the library. And really the starting point for this room was the green that I chose for the bookshelves. I've kind of been into this Kelly green lately. It kind of is a good color that works with a lot of my collections. This was a perfect spot for me to display a variety of things, including a collection of matte black mid-century McCoy pottery, which I have across the top of the cabinets. And then probably one of my favorite things in the shelves are these paint palettes, which are, you know, things that would ordinarily have just been thrown away, but are actually kind of beautiful on their own. And sometimes my friends come over and we'll clear off everything off the table and put food and drinks on the table. And it's also fun for games and things like that. It really makes this space really versatile, and it's super convenient since it's right off the kitchen. So when you come out of the library, you enter into this little dinette space, which is connected to my kitchen. This house was built in 1977, and so this is pretty much the exact same footprint of the kitchen and the dinette that the house has always had. And I knew I wanted to do a couple things. One, I wanted to continue the dark caviar paint that I've used as kind of a common thread throughout my house. And I also wanted to sort of experiment a little bit in here with color. And the first thing I did was find this really colorful backsplash tile. This is a terracotta tile that is made in Mexico. I got just boxes of tile in a mixture of colors. In addition to that, the tiles are all a little bit different sizes. And so my tile guy was very good at trying to get those applied, you know, as straight as we could. And so that was really the kickoff point for the color scheme in the kitchen and the dinette. And then in addition to that, I kind of wanted to mix up the cabinetry with different colors and just to kind of experiment with that and see how it worked. And so that was kind of the reason that I've got, you know, I've got lowers that are in the caviar color, and then over here uppers in this sort of pale yellow. And like I said, I'm still kind of experimenting with it to see, you know, if I live with that forever, but it definitely took on kind of a Mexican flair in here, which also inspired the collection of Mexican plates and pottery that I have in here, including the plates that I've hung kind of all the way around. So let's go check out the next space. Okay, so now we're at my office. And really the kickoff point for the design of my office was this industrial office furniture in this sort of burnt orange. This became a signature color of mine at least 25 years ago because I first bought this filing cabinet at a vintage office supply company in Dallas, and just really loved the color. And then it has since become, you know, as I said, kind of a signature color. I thought this sort of light blue color on the walls would be a nice contrast to the orange, and then it also complemented some of the collections that I ended up putting in here. So as a collector, every room I have has collections, and this room's no different. I've got a couple of things in here. First, I've got a couple of cabinets of this vintage swirl pottery. This is called Namaji pottery. But probably my favorite collection in this room is this collection of vintage caricatures that I have hung on the wall. Doc and Agnes, they were the first pair that I really had ever seen, I think. And something about the rich colors and the exaggerated features, and in particular of Doc and Agnes, almost like a 1940s kind of feel aesthetic to the cartooning, and my collection just began to grow. So that's the office. Let's go check out the next space. All right, so now we're in one of my spare bathrooms to talk about probably one of my more kitschy collections, and definitely one of my more controversial installations of a collection, which are these vintage tourist plates that I've essentially wallpapered this bathroom with. For years I would see them at estate sales for 10 cents, 25 cents, and kind of resisted collecting them. And then eventually I went to an estate sale on 75% off day, and there was just a huge stack of them for really pennies, and I just couldn't resist. So I bought a whole stack. And then I went to another sale that day, and they also had a stack. So the first day I had about 30 or 40 tourist plates for just dollars. And then I sort of developed an affinity for certain designs and certain colors in the plates. And so I spent a few years collecting these, and all of a sudden I realized that this extra bathroom might be the perfect place to do it. So, you know, when people ask about how this really functions, I try to remind them that, you know, it's more of an artistic expression than really anything else. I think it's a little bit aspirational for most people, and so I hope they see it and just get a little bit inspired by doing something different and something fun. Okay, so that's my plate bathroom. Let's go check out the next space. All right, so now we're in my dining room, which is a pretty nice space. Well, for me, it's the first time that I've ever had a real formal dining room, so I was really excited about getting a table that would accommodate, you know, a good number of people for a fun dinner party. And so one of the first pieces that I bought was actually this table. I liked it because of the really interesting legs, and it was also in this black color, which is very similar to the caviar that I've used as an accent color throughout the house. But really the kickoff point for the dining room was this collection of vintage portraits that are super colorful along the wall. During the pandemic, one of my Instagram friends here in Oklahoma City messaged me on Instagram and said, "Hey, I know you love vintage portraits. I was just at this estate sale where the gentleman was a prolific painter, and he has tons of these portraits," and she sent me a few pictures. And so I immediately jumped up and ran to the estate sale and picked up about 50 of these really colorful portraits that he had painted at a studio in Oklahoma City in the 1980s. So there's just something really fun about the obvious 80s style of some of the people in the portraits themselves, but I also was really attracted to the bright colors. And so when I knew that I wanted to hang them in here, that was really the inspiration for the room color. And it's also very similar to the sort of Kelly green that I used in the library. So there's kind of a continuity throughout the house with these pops of this similar green. And so those are a main focal point in the room. Another focal point in the room is actually this chandelier over the table. So it was original to the house, and I thought that I probably would change it out because it's a little different from my usual aesthetic. But once I started furnishing the space and would take a few photographs, and I would see the chandelier kind of juxtaposed against some of my, you know, rougher decor, I kind of liked the mixture. And so then I decided to embellish it with black lampshades, which kind of ties it in with the lamps that I have throughout the house, and to add a cord cover to kind of ground it a little bit with the black, and so I've ended up really liking it. Well, over this opening is a sign in Spanish that actually says "a full stomach, a happy heart." That was a piece that I bought many years ago at a flea market outside of Dallas, Texas, and I think the sentiment is really great, and a dining room is the perfect place for it to be. So let's go check out my pottery den. Okay, so now we're back in my den, and interestingly, this room was originally the primary suite in the house, but because it is a large space and also was the only access to the backyard, I needed to use it for a den. So we reformulated this room to do that, which included taking out a bathroom to create a new primary suite, which we hid behind some hidden bookcase doors that we'll talk about in just a minute. But as you first come into this space, it's a pretty large room, and on this wall I have this hutch. Then I've put a collection of religious art and pieces up here. And then, as I like to do throughout the house, I have a mixture of furniture. So I have things like these modern lucite chairs mixed in with a lot of vintage pieces. But really, the most important thing in this room is my pottery collection that is floor to ceiling along this wall. So when I bought the house, I was looking for a few things. In particular, I knew I needed a very big wall that could house enough shelving to accommodate this white pottery collection. So this room was really built around this collection. In particular, this collection is something that I started about 25 years ago. It's mostly mid-century American-made pottery. And if you're at all familiar with vintage American pottery, you've probably heard of the McCoy Pottery Company, which was a pretty prolific producer of this kind of pottery for many years. But there are probably 5 or 6 different makers represented in this collection. And when I first started collecting it, my rules were it has to be a satin or matte finish in this creamy white, and I wouldn't pay more than $10 for any single piece. And so those were my rules for quite a few years as I built the collection. And then once I had established a really good representation of some of the more common pieces, I started looking for rarer, and which means typically more expensive pieces, to sort of complete my collection. And that's kind of the mode that I use for all of my collections. And then also in this corner right behind me, I've got a collection of shell art. Something else that I've done that you can see in this room, which I really do throughout my house, is I like to layer rugs. And so in this room, I started with a pretty neutral striped rug as the foundation, and then I built on that with a few more colorful rugs that are turned different directions. I just think it's kind of interesting and something that I like to do throughout the house. So then as we come over to this corner of the room, we have these bookshelves, which we actually installed to conceal the opening to what became my primary suite. Because the proximity of that was a little close to the den, we wanted to come up with a way to sort of hide it. And so the way we did that was to create this sort of hidden bookshelf door. Okay, so now we're behind the hidden bookcase doors in my bedroom. So I do actually live in the house and have some spaces that function like a normal person. And so even though it's hidden behind the bookcase doors, I wanted it to be somewhat contiguous with the colors in the pottery den. And so I pulled this sort of caramelly color that I used in the background of the pottery shelves onto the walls. This room became a little bit of a repository for my sort of science collections. One of the things I like to do, since I have multiple collections around the house, is to keep similar things together. And so this room has all of those sort of teaching and educational science kind of objects, including throughout the room, I've got a number of these shadow boxes that include natural things from pieces of arrowhead and flint that I collected as a kid. and an assortment of seashells. These are all things that I mounted myself. And then one of my favorite things in this room is this collection of mushroom and fungus specimens. I think these were teaching aids, and mostly, I think they're all European, but they're just really interesting and intricate models of a variety of mushrooms that I've got displayed there. So I do have a place to sleep amongst all of my vintage and collections. All right, so let's go check out the next space. Okay, so now we're in what I call my hobby room. This is kind of a miscellaneous space that goes into my laundry room and then out to my garage. So it's kind of was a perfect space for me to, if I bring in vintage or new collectible items, that I can kind of drop them in here or use the sink in the laundry room to kind of clean them up. And so this has just become kind of a fun, miscellaneous, eclectic space. I've got in this corner a desk and kind of just an inspiration nook, I guess you could call it. The prior owner had installed these cabinets that I have painted kind of in my signature orange, which provides a lot of storage for, honestly, in most of these I've got, I think, growing collections. A lot of people will ask me if I immediately display a collection or if I grow it first before displaying it, and I tend to grow them a little bit and display them. And what was really great about this room is that it has a lot of closets with built-in shelving and storage. And so for pieces that I'm not currently displaying or things that I just don't want to use at the moment, I've been able to really store a bunch of them away in here and keep them out of my main living spaces. So that's the hobby room. Let's go check out the next space. Okay, so now we're in my main living room, which is really two distinct spaces. This room was originally two living rooms when the house was a duplex, and the prior owner merged it into one really nice sized space and vaulted the ceiling and built this fireplace and these built-in shelves. And so I've divided it into two areas with furniture. On this side, I've got a little more of my cozy or comfier furniture pieces. Some of my friends say I don't really have any seats that are comfortable, but I disagree. And then I paired these vintage pieces with a couple of additional vintage chairs that I had reupholstered in a green that kind of echoes the green from some of the other rooms in the house. But really what I like the most probably in this side of the house is my collection of Ozark tourist pottery, sometimes called Ozark roadside pottery, which is this really brightly colored swirled tourist pottery that originated in Hollister, Missouri in about 1920, 1930. I stumbled upon it at an antique mall in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was just really attracted to how heavy and weighty this pottery is, and also to the thickness of the glazes and the painting that he used. It's almost, you can feel the drips in some of the pieces, and finding a bird bath that is still in one piece in relatively good shape is pretty hard to do. And then in addition to this, is a birdhouse, which is kind of unusual and fun. And so I've been able to find a few of those pieces over the years, but it's just a really fun pottery to collect. And because it wasn't particularly mass produced, it's a little harder to find. And so it is a collection that's a little slower to build. Let's work our way over to the other side of the living room. And on this side, I've got another sitting area, but one of the most fun parts of this side of the room is my collection of tramp art. And if you don't know what tramp art is, it's a term that's referring to a type of folk art that originated in the late 1800s and I think became really popular during the Depression, where really untrained artisans would take cast off and waste wood materials, and they applied them in a layered and graduated fashion and chipped or cut the edges to create this texture that you see in these pieces. So you see them in picture frames a lot, and so I like to get those and have mirror installed in all of them so that they kind of have a cohesive look. And so it's still an ongoing, collection that I like to build. So one thing that people ask me all the time is, what are you going to do when you have an earthquake or a tornado, and because you have so many breakable things. And so one of the things that I would grab if I'm taking shelter in a tornado is this lamp. This is an Ozark pottery piece that is fashioned into a lamp, and it's one of only two that those of us who collect this pottery have really ever seen or heard of. I think the other one is in a museum somewhere. But one of my Instagram friends who lived in Missouri, in fact in Hollister where the pottery originated, and collected and sold the pottery for years, found this lamp and acquired it, and then I had asked her if she ever decided to sell it that I would love to buy it, and she eventually did that. And so it's kind of a prized possession. So it's one of, as I said, of just only two that we've ever seen. Probably the number one reaction I get when people come in is, oh wow, which kind of makes me happy because I want them to see things that maybe they've never seen before, and a way of decorating that's a little unusual and maybe a little impractical, but really just for fun.